Welcome to another episode of Full Build Friday, where I try to build a character from a comic, game, or similar source using the baseline rules of Pathfinder 2nd Edition and the Path Builder app. This week's build is a departure from my usual sources as we take a step onto the other side to conjure a build for Dr. Facilier from Disney's Princess and the Frog. Now this character is featured in a movie and obviously doesn't take up the whole 1 hour and 35 minutes of it, meaning that we have a limited amount of time to get to know him. Fortunately, this sinister shadowy sorcerer is something of a showboat, which means we have plenty to work with when it comes to build goals. Dr. Facilier is a smooth-talking con artist who supplements his innate charm with voodoo magic. This magic comes from Loa, or spirits that he has made contact with, and refers to as his friends on the other side. He seemingly uses a pink powder to produce illusions and accomplish simple magics, while also being able to craft magical items, such as talismans that can change the wearer's appearance. However, his magic seems limited in only producing results for others, but as a highly accomplished conman, liar, and trickster, he excels at manipulating them to grant his own desires. He is also known as the Shadow Man, likely because his shadow appears to be sentient, acting independently but typically in alignment with him, and is able to interact with the physical world.
Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready?
Then let's dive into the dark for the design of this dastardly doctor. This build is going to lean into the good doctor's Shadowman epithet by building him as a Kayal, or Fetchling, as they are more commonly known. I had initially looked at the bright heritage, given the light show he puts on during his villain song, but a later aspect of this build will conflict with that. So instead I use the deep heritage, selecting a resistance to negative energy, given his association with some more malicious spirits and the like. He takes hard to fool as his Ancestry feat because, as the saying goes, you can't con a con man. I did toy with the idea of using the royalty background.
I'm a royal myself on my mother's side.
But stuck with the charlatan background based on how we see him running scams at the start of the movie. This makes him trained in deception and grants him the charming liar skill feat, which feels a perfect fit for this smarmy spellcaster. He also becomes trained in underworld lore, a bit of fun with double meaning to it. As described in his villain song, Dr. Facilier's powers are derived from his friends on the other side, a collection of seemingly malicious Loa. Given the source of his mystical might along with his own crepuscular companion, Dr. Facilier is built as a witch who draws power from the starless shadow patron. This further buys into his shady characteristics while granting him the occult spell list. A keen collection of cruel curses and crippling castings for a con man to conjure. With his patron, he also is trained in occultism and then becomes trained in acrobatics, arcana, crafting, intimidation, performance, stealth, and thievery. For his ability scores, he's going to prioritize his intelligence but wants a solid charisma to run his cons, and seems pretty agile, leading to some reasoning behind dexterity as well. Some cantrips that immediately stand out to me are musical accompaniment and prestidigitation, but for some more mechanically useful spells, I take up telekinetic projectile and void warp. His familiar comes with fear, and then he can add on options such as penumbral shroud and grim tendrils, focusing on shadow, illusion, and similar sorts of spells. In perhaps too deep a delve into his shadowy themes, at 2nd level Dr. Facilier dips into the Shadowcaster dedication, which prevents him from gaining light spells. It gets him another focus point and the Cloak of Shadow domain spell to douse an area in darkness. Alchemical crafting starts covering his ability to craft goods for others, specifically calling to mind the hair powder he demonstrates at the start of the movie. This build isn't terribly interested in general feats and will take Confabulator instead of a purely general feat at 3rd level, making Dr. Facilier a better liar and able to distract and befuddle his marks. This is facilitated by a skill increase at this level, making him an expert in deception. With this level up, he also gains 2nd rank spells, and there's a couple solid choices here. Picking up Blistering Invective or Cutting Insult play into his sharp wit, while he can also take up Darkness and Swallow Light to get some more of his darkness and shadow based effects. At 4th level he takes Enhanced Familiar, increasing the number of familiar or master abilities he can gain, which brings him up to 6 abilities, though one is always dedicated to the Familiar of Stalking Night from his patron. Root Magic as a skill feat further plays into his creation of charms and other magical foibles with which to enhance others, though this is a touch more protective than his usual products. For his Ancestry feat at 5th level, he takes Clever Shadow, allowing his shadow to interact with the physical world in simple manners. A skill increase to occultism makes him an expert in it. And then the two standout spells at 3rd rank are Shadow Projectile and Shadow Spy, befitting his theme, though again, I might be diving too deeply into it. Case in point, he takes a greater lesson in a Lesson of Shadow as his 6th level class feat, which grants Malicious Shadow as a focus spell and nets him a 3rd focus point. I do think the spell serves superbly with the way that he uses his own shadow to tangle and trip up his adversaries. Then, Lengthy Diversion allows him to expand upon his ability to trick and distract others to better pull off his cons. He explores this even further by taking Fleeing Diversion as his skill feat instead of a general feat at 7th level, which helps him get out of there when a con goes wrong. Naturally, to go along with this, his skill increase will make him a master in Deception. I think the spell that stands out the most from his 4th rank spells is Veil, allowing him to disguise his allies much like how he disguised Lawrence in the film. Honeyed Words is also nice just as a massive buff to his Deception skill. To cover his ability to craft poultices and other portents of power, Dr. Facilier will take Cauldron for his 8th level class feat, letting him make magical mixtures to share with his friends. Lie to Me as the Dastardly Doctor's skill feat really proves the classic axiom of you can't con a con man to be true, and just generally suits him nicely. Hefting Shadow as his 9th level Ancestry feat expands on Clever Shadow, and directly references the scene in which his shadow plucks a coin from his jacket pocket. Instead of taking his skill increase to occultism, he'll start buffing his crafting, which makes him an expert in it. Furthermore, he gains access to 5th rank spells. For shadowy options, there's Shadow Blast, Umbral Journey, and Shadow Siphon, which I can't actually find the remastered version of. There's also Invoke Spirits, which feels appropriate for this hard Hungen. Finally, at 10th level, we pick up Incredible Familiar. This grants him even more familiar / master abilities and allows him to take a specific familiar. In particular, the Shadow Familiar. There is some access granted by Shadowcaster which I usually ignore, but it felt like it fit regardless, and so I included it in the build. He still has a leftover familiar ability, which I would typically spend on Partner in Crime. This will let his shadow aid him in running scams. Then, with his expertise in crafting, he can take up magical crafting as a skill feat to start making his trinkets and totems for others. His intelligence boost will also make him trained in society. He's starting to look pretty good on skill feats by 11th level, so he'll take toughness as his general feat to help shore up his health just a little bit. He'll switch back to occultism with this level's skill increase and become a master in it. This is another big level, mainly because, in granting him 6th rank spells, it gives him access to Cursed Metamorphosis, letting him turn somebody into the eponymous frog from his movie. There's also Ravenous Darkness, which buys into his theme that we've been working on if you want to continue down that road. Underneath that veneer of charm, Dr. Facilier is a bitter and vengeful man, which he can represent with a major lesson to learn the Lesson of Vengeance at 12th level. In addition to that aspect, Needle of Vengeance also just plays nicely into the whole voodoo theme that he's got going on. Consult the Spirits for his skill feat uses his occultism as well as referencing the Loa he struck his deal with. He does get another familiar ability, which is probably best spent on Independent, Spell Battery, or Innate Surge, following his next level's feat. He can take Shadow's Assault as his 13th level Ancestry feat to get some extra castings of Shadow Blast, which even scales a tiny bit as he levels. He'll become a master in crafting and then take a look at 7th rank spells. Shadow Raid and Tempest of Shadow stand out as options to take here, which I think match his theme, and the latter can be thought to work for the multiple shadows he sends out when hunting for the frogs. Spirit Familiar is a really fun feat at 14th level, and one of the reasons why I think the Wishmaster really works, better emphasizing the familiar as part of the class. This causes our voodoo villain Shadow to fly out and steal the essence of enemies to then empower his allies. But only his allies. This in turn works nicely for the fact that his magic doesn't work for himself, only others. For a slightly more impactful skill feat, he can take Disturbing Knowledge to represent his eclectic and bizarre collection of trinkets and know-how. At 15th level, he takes up Incredible Investiture, which will allow him to invest in more magical items, something that feels appropriate for this collector of curios. A skill increase will make him a legend in Deception, but when it comes to spells, there aren't really any 8th rank spells that stand out to me, So take whatever you want here. Maybe go pick up some earlier level spells that you skipped. With his 16th level class feat, this devious doctor takes Shadow Reservoir. This allows him to tap into spells that he doesn't have or aren't prepared, which is always handy and can allow him to prepare more utility spells and save his offense spells for this effect. Then for all that charm, Facilier is a fearsome foe of his featured film, and Reveal Machinations feels like the classic sort of skill feat that all villains should have. For his final Ancestry feat at 17th level, Skirt the Light feels like the best option, letting him travel swiftly with Shadow Walk. This time around he'll take a skill increase in Occultism to become a legend in it. After that, the only 9th rank spell I think that is really worth mentioning here is Unspeakable Shadow, which is just another concept to match his shadowy tones and design. In the film proper, Dr. Facilier intends to sacrifice the souls of all of New Orleans to his friends on the other side. At 18th level, he can take Patron's Claim to represent this, allowing these friends to reach out through his shadow and grab at the souls of his enemies, and in turn, be gifted further magic from these friends. It works out pretty marvelously by my estimation. Now normally, this nefarious Nolan's ne'er-do-well is dealing out curses, but his familiarity with them can lend to the Break Curse skill feat, letting him use his knowledge to help instead of hurt for once. It takes his friends dragging the Shadow Man to the other side to finish him off, which led to me taking Die Hard as his general feat at 19th level. He becomes a legend in the crafting, and then the obvious choice for his 10th rank spell is Shadow Army, letting him deploy a host of lurking horrors. Because I don't think he really gets the full benefit out of the other witch feats at 20th level, he takes Patron's Truth as his final feat, netting him a second 10th rank spell slot. This works with him beseeching his Loa for more magic, while his skill feat is spent on Slippery Secrets, letting him evade attempts to suss out the truth from him. A final boost to intelligence then sees him become trained in religion. If you want to take Dr. Facilier into a free archetype game, he can more deeply explore Shadowcaster dedication, with options such as Disciple of Shadow, Shadow Spell, Shadow Magic, and then maybe Shadow Power for more castings of Shadow Blast. That is a lot of shadows. I could also see dipping into other archetypes, such as Captivator, Dandy, or even Familiar Master to get more benefits for his shadow. We've gone into the dark and emerged unscathed on the other side, so let's take a second to review our build. Dr. Facilier is a deep fetchling witch of the charlatan background who is granted power by a Starless Shadow patron to represent his connection to his friends on the other side, as well as his association with shadows. Using magic to only produce results for others will mainly be a flavor thing, but does have some representation in the Spirit Familiar only being able to heal allies, not himself. His selection of spells can give him a variety of ways to create illusions, as well as manipulate shadows and darkness, while feats such as alchemical crafting, magical crafting, and cauldron allow him to produce magical items and concoctions to be used by others. His living shadow comes through his Shadow Familiar, achieved both through his class and the enhanced Familiar feat, while access to it is made easier by his Shadowcaster dedication. However, even with that, he can start exploring that concept through his Clever Shadow and Hefting Shadow Ancestry feats. His deep investment in deception and feats such as Charming Liar, Confabulator, and Lie to Me help him better serve as a conman and shyster, whereas his occultism skill and its disturbing knowledge, root magic, and break curse play into the legitimate mystical might that he wields. Conniving and cunning to the core, this crafty and crepuscular caster curries confidence in his customers, only to cause chaotic curses and cruel contracts. If you would like to check out a breakdown that includes item suggestions and a fuller exploration of its use in a free archetype game, consider checking out the blog for this build. That, along with the Monster Monday Twitter and Discord, are linked in the description below. Thanks for watching, and have a fantastic Friday.
I promise I'll pay your back! I promise!